أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا. صلوات. This is the month of Rajab, a month which is associated with the Ahlul Bayt, especially with Amir al-Mu'mineen. We are also already into the second half of the month. Normally, I use this term many times, that if you look at the Islamic calendar and if you ask me what is the spiritual season for the Islamic calendar, I would say it's Rajab, Sha'ban and Ramadan. And this is where you'll see, even in Mafatih al-Janan, for example, by Sheikh Abbas Qummi, that when he writes this section on the A'mal of the months, you will see he doesn't start with Muharram Safar. It starts with Rajab, Sha'ban, Ramadan, Shawwal, then all the way going back to the month of Jamad al-Thani as the end of it. And this is where you have to realize that these 3 months are connected to one another as the months of spirituality. It's very interesting that when we talk about the month of Rajab and Sha'ban and Ramadan, there are different hadiths about it, where the Prophet talks about Sha'ban as his month and Ramadan as the month of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is one statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen where he says, Rajab is my month, Sha'ban is the month of Rasulullah, and Ramadan is the month of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's symbolically, it's a very powerful statement. You need to go to Ali to reach to Muhammad, and from Muhammad you will reach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so keeping that in mind, especially that it's also the month of Quran, although we associate Quran more with the month of Ramadan, but the Bi'sat happened in the month of Rajab. The first revelation of the first ayat of Quran happened during this month. So I thought maybe, keeping that in mind, let me briefly talk about the importance of Quran. And I would like to, again, going back to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, just one item from the wasiyyat, the advice that Amir al-Mu'mineen gave between the zarbat and the shahadat. So the occasion is very important. This is after he's been, injured and before he passed away. And this is not a normal wasiyyat that a person would write about himself, what to do with my body or, my property and things like that. This is actually an advice that he was giving to his own children as well as to the community. Now, in the preamble, he actually addresses Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhim salam, specifically about them. But then at the end, again, he comes to the family. But in between, he says something which is for us, because he begins that main part of the wasiyyat by saying, "Usikuma wa jami'u waladi wa ahli wa man balaghahu kitabi." That I give this advice to you both, Hassan and Hussein, and all my children, and my family, wa man balaghahu kitabi, and whomsoever this book of mine reaches to him, or the letter of mine reaches. It means Imam Ali alayhi salam was not only talking, he wanted this to, he was dictating it. He wanted somebody to write it down. And that has come to us in Nahju Balagha. You know, if you see letter number 47 in Nahju Balagha, this is the wasiyat. So he says, وَمَنْ بَلَغَهُ كِتَابِ, and who, to whomever my letter reaches. So each one of us here is being addressed by Amir al-Mu'mineen. And so he begins, there are about total 12 items, but I would like to emphasize on one here. Number 6, where he says, Wallah, Wallah fil Quran. He says, I remind you of Allah. I remind you of Allah regarding the Quran. Because that is our foundation. That is the only book in which we don't have any doubt about it. Any other book, we never use the term Sahih before it. Because all the books of Ahadith, we have to individually scrutinize them to see whether they are reliable or acceptable or not. But Quran is beyond any level of, doubt or criticism as far as the integrity of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned. And so this is something we have to keep in mind at all the times. And Amir al-Mu'mineen here, you see, the first 5 items, he didn't even talk about salat. He talked about taqwa, he talked about being organized in your affairs, he talked about making peace when there is dispute among you, he talked about orphans, he talked about neighbors, and then he talks about the Quran. And this is where, then he comes to salat and hajj and jihad and, family ties and amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar. So when he talks about the Quran, he said something very profound. And I think we really have to seriously look at it. It has been 14 centuries. Maybe we collectively as a ummah, we have lost that. But individually, we still have the opportunity to live by this wasiyat. What does he say? He says, Wallah, Wallah, I remind you of Allah. I remind you of Allah fil Quran. Regarding the Quran, لا يسبقكم بالعمل به غيركم. It shouldn't be that others implement the Quran before you. The word غيركم here basically is talking about non-Muslims. And it seems that it is possible that people who are not even followers of our faith might be studying the Quran, getting wisdom from it, implementing it, whereas we just have the book. Or at most we read it. But what does Amir al-Mu'mineen say? لا يسبقكم بالعمل. In implementing the Quran in our life. Others should not be ahead of you. And this is something we have to really think about. I in the Friday khutbah, I mentioned this point, and I would like to repeat here that once there is a series of question answers, very brief ones, somebody has compiled, where they were asking Allah Tabai rahmatullah alayhi different questions on different issues. And there somebody basically, asked him, he says, namaz we do, fasting in Ramadan we do, charity we pay, we go for hajj, we go for ziyarat, we do all these amal and everything, but the blessings comes on the West. Everything we do, but the goodies are coming on that side. And Allah Tabai really, and I would say this is one way of explaining this statement of Amir al-Mu'mineen about Quran, where he says that they take care of their own people, and so Allah has blessed them, whereas we don't care about our own people. Just think about it. Majority of us come from the third world country. Look at how things are done over there. And I'm not talking about non-Muslim countries. I'm talking about pure Muslim countries, 100%. Here, if you want to, for example, have your passport, if there is no legal problem in your application, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to go for any safarish, good word from anyone. You don't have to bribe anyone. You don't have to bribe the clerk there in your passport office. You can actually just mail your application. If everything is proper, you are going to get your passport without any problem. Whereas, you go to Muslim countries, things are not that easy. Means even those things which can be done legally, which is your right, you still have to go through hurdles. And this is where we have to realize that, yes, foreign policy is very bad as far as the West is concerned, no doubt about it. But when it comes to their own people, they still take care of them relatively better than many Muslims when it comes to their own citizens. And I would agree with that statement of Allama Tabatabai. Actually, we can even relate it to one hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen on this issue. Salawat. When it comes to the issue of, Salat al-Rahim, taking care of those who are related to you, maintaining the ties. This has been emphasized in the Quran more than namaz. If you put together the ayat about Silat al-Rahim, maintaining the ties with your relatives, and then also the ayat where Allah condemns those who sever the ties with those who are related to them, you will see that number-wise, those ayat are more than salat. And there is a hadith where somebody asked Amir al-Mu'mineen that, I see sometimes two families, Muslims. One is a very practicing religious family, one is a non-practicing people. But they have been blessed with by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas the practicing family is going through, financial difficulties. And this is where Amir al-Mu'mineen says, look at their attitude with their relatives. Maybe this family which is non-practicing, they are doing Silatul Rahim. Whereas those who are practicing in rituals are not really, caring about their own relatives. And so Allah blesses them. There are so many hadiths that when you do Silatul Rahim, even your life will be prolonged, your sustenance would be increased, your du'as would be accepted, and so many things are there. Especially when we talk about, this issue of Radd Bala, to avoid any problems in our life, Silatul Rahim is one of the important ways. Even when it comes to Sadaqah, the first recipient are those who are related to us. And so this is where we have to realize that when Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Wallah, Wallah, bil-Quran, la yasbiqukum bil-amal bihi ghayrukum, this is a reality. And so then we complain, oh, where is Allah? Well, Allah says, I have certain rules and regulations and I work according to the system. Salawat prandik baro. एक बार और सलावत पढ़ें. That brings me to this last passage of Surah Yasin, which we recite every Thursday or whenever we have the gatherings for the marhumin. Surah Yasin basically is considered to be the Qalb al-Quran. It is the heart of the Quran. The reason why it's called Qalb al-Quran because it has the summary of the three fundamental concepts of Islam. One is Tawheed, the other is Nubuwwat, and the third is Qiyamah. However, the sequence in Surah Yasin is not in that way. The earlier part talks about Nubuwwat and Quran, and then it comes to Tawheed, and then it comes to Qiyamah and the Day of Judgment. But at the end, ayat number 69 to the end of it, 83, is kind of a summary of the surah. And in summary also the same sequence has been followed. So in that summary, which I consider to be the summary of Surah Yasin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by talking about the Quran, because the concept of Quran being a revelation is part of Nubuwwat. And this is where he says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ, that we have not taught poetry to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You know, one of the labels that the mushrikeen used against the Prophet to say that he is sha'ir. You know, he's a poet, and these are not words of God, this is poetry of his own. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, in a way, responds to that by saying, we have not taught him poetry, nor is it appropriate for him to compose poetry. It's not that he didn't have the ability, he had, but it was not appropriate, because if he starts composing his own poetry, then they will say, aha, see, we said this. So it's not that he didn't have the ability, but he did not ever compose poetry. And so what is this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. This is nothing but the reminder for the people and a plain Quran. Quran is very simple as far as the understanding of the meaning is concerned. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that why has the Quran been sent? لِيُنذِرُ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا, so that this book will warn, admonish, advise, and guide he who is alive. The irony is we recite this surah for the sawab of those who are dead. And I don't mean to say don't do it. Do it double times, it's okay. But when you are reciting this surah for those who are dead, see what Quran is saying to you. That this book is there, man kana hayyan, for somebody who is alive. Don't leave it to a point where people will recite the Quran for you as sawab. You need to read the Quran. You need to get the warning from the Quran. You need to study the Quran. And then comes the state of implementation, where Ali says, لا يسبقكم بالعمل به غيركم. Amal on the Quran is the ultimate goal. Reading it and understanding it are the stepping stones for reaching to the issue of al-amal bihi, to implement the Quran. Salawat. And so when we look at this issue, this is where we have to really understand Quran, that the purpose of Quran is not just reciting. The word Quran itself means recital. So yes, there is ajr and sawab in reciting it, but the point is that you have to recite to understand, and you have to understand in order to act on it. If you even look at the statement of Rasulullah, I think it is in Surah Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically paints the scenery of what will happen on the day of Qiyamah. There are many ayat when Allah talks about Qiyamah, He uses past tense. And the reason why He uses past tense is just to make us realize that for us, Qiyamah is something which will happen in the future. It is ghaib for us. But for Allah, it's a reality as if it has already happened. And to emphasize this point, Allah uses the past tense. And this is where, and you will see that even the sceneries is there that on this day, so-and-so said that. But the day has not yet come. And so one of the issues on the day of Qiyamah, you will see that the Prophet will say, and it is quoted in the Quran. If I don't forget the words, I think وَيَقُولُ الرَّسُولُ. The Prophet will say, يَا رَبِّي اتَّخَذَ قَوْمِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. that, "Oh Allah, my nation, my community has forsaken this Quran." So Rasulullah on the day of judgment will complain that my community have done hijr. Hijrah, migration, means have moved away from the teachings of the Quran. Mahjur means to leave something away, to be away from it or abandon it. And this is where we have to realize that, is Quran not being recited? MashaAllah, we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, Qari of Quran in the world. We have a huge number of people who have memorized the Quran. I think this is the only book in the world which has been memorized by so many people, cover to cover. Even probably when it comes to the reading, this is the most read text in the world. So the printing is there, the learning of recitation is there, memorization is there. People recite it. But what is the point there? The point is that we are not reaching to the final goal, which is to see how we implement that Quran in our life. Salawat. Let me connect it to Hadith Saqalain, one of the last advice that the Prophet gave. And he uttered these words not once, many, many places, many, many times, where he says, "Inni tarikum fikum saqalain," that I am leaving two precious things among you. One is the Book of Allah, and the other is the Ahlul Bayt. And the emphasis that we see, for example, in Sahih Tirmidhi, the version of this hadith says that as long as you hold on fast to both of them, لَن تَضِلُّ بَعْدِي, you will not go astray after me. And so this issue of holding on the Quran and holding on to the Ahlul Bayt, what does it mean? It's not like, I'm holding the Quran here. No. Basically, we are talking about living by the Quran. That is what it means, as a guide for ourselves. Holding onto the Ahlul Bayt means what? It is basically implementing their teachings in our life, their series, their sirat and their example. And this is something, actually in Sahih Muslim, the same Hadith Saqalain has come, where the Prophet, very similar words that Amir al-Mu'minin uses it in this wasiyat. He says, "I remind you, I udhakkirukum," double times. I remind you. And then he says the whole sentence 3 times. I remind you of the Ahlul Bayt, how you deal with them. I will ask you what you did with my Ahlul Bayt. And so this whole issue of, holding onto the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt is very important to be linked to them. Of course, it is our, honor. We take pride in that, definitely. But we have to really live up to that title of being the followers of the Quran and the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimu salatu wa salam. Salawat. When we look at the importance of the Quran in the life of the Ahlul Bayt, this has been explained in different ways to us. And let me end towards the end of my talk, that when we look at the incident regarding the tragedy of Bibi Fatima al-Zahra, it's amazing that, and I don't want to be kind of, sectarian or polemical here, but it's the realities. We cannot forget the historical events just to learn message from it. The last days of the Prophet, this hadith that he has mentioned, that I'm leaving 2 things behind, he wanted now this to be, he wanted to dictate that in a written form. What he had said before, different places, was verbally. And he says, bring the paper and the pen so that I can dictate to you something that if you follow, لَن تَضِلُّ بَعْدِي, you will never go astray. He uses that term, which he has used after talking about Saqalain. So those who were around, they're clever people, they realize what he's going to do. And this is where, what do they say? They turn around and they say, well, he's not feeling well. Sayyid Bukhari mentions this 3 places with polite words, where he gives the name of the person who said it, that, he's not feeling well, he's in pain. 3 other places he actually Sayyid Bukhari uses very harsh words which were uttered, that he's not in his right mind. So there, right there, Rasulullah then said, get away from here. And he didn't write it, because when I'm alive, they are going to question my mind and my sanity. If I write it down, they will say that this was written in the state of delusion. He didn't know what he was saying. And this is where, people say, why didn't then still he insist on putting that in writing? That was the reason. He knew what would happen to it. But there, the words of Rasulullah were rejected in the name of the Quran. They say, Hasbuna Kitabullah. The book of Allah is sufficient for us. We don't need his words. And mashallah, we see immediately after his wafat, when the issue of the inheritance of Fatima al-Zahra comes up, and she goes and claims that, what do you see there? Compare that statement with here. Now you will see a hadith is being concocted, fabricated. Well, there you say, Hasbuna Kitabullah, and Bibi Fatima al-Zahra in her entire speech doesn't bring a single hadith from her father. She quotes the ayat of Quran, because you are saying that my father said, when a prophet dies, whatever he leaves behind is not to be inherited. It becomes Mal Ummah, property of the public. And then she says, well, what about this ayat of Quran, where Sulaiman and Dawood are inheriting? Yahya, Yarithani. This is where Zakaria is praying, Allah, give me a son who will inherit me. And so all these ayat she recites, and the general ayat about inheritance, she says, what about these ayat of Quran? That when a person dies, the male will have double of the share of the daughter. Is this ayat doesn't apply to my father? And so she brings the Quran there right in the front. Whereas these were the people who were saying, Hasbuna Kitabullah, they should have actually followed the ayat of Quran. But they didn't do this. And this is where we have to realize, if you really want to see the true source of guidance in form of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah, we have to go to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. Salawat. Amir al-Mu'mineen used the Quran in Siffin, in Jamal before that. When before fighting, hostilities begin in Jamal, Amir al-Mu'mineen sent people to talk with Talha and Zubair and Aisha and say, let us resolve this issue. And his plea was, let us sit down and resolve this on the basis of the Quran. And they didn't listen to all these advice from Abdullah bin Abbas and others who were sent. Eventually, Amir al-Mu'mineen himself goes. Talked with Zubair and Talha, almost convinced Zubair, who pledged to him, okay, I'll not fight against you. Because Ali said that, you remember one day you were joking with me? They were all cousins, huh? Zubair is cousin of Rasulullah and cousin of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he was among the people who supported Ali against Saqifa. He was among those people who were in the house of Fatima at that time. But later on he changed. And so Amir al-Mu'minin reminded him, said, remember one day you were joking with me and Rasulullah said that Zubair, one day you're going to fight against him. And Zubair took that as a joke. It can't be that I would fight Ali. And that's where he remembered, and he's basically made a pledge that I will not fight against you. He goes back to his own camp. His son, this is where, sometimes you might be always on Sirat al-Mustaqim, but your son grows up and is the son who is misguiding you. This is where Abdullah bin Zubair. He says that, just think about history. All the women of Quraysh will say, look at Zubair, he was such a coward that at the last moment he quit and went away. And Zubair says to his son, but I have made a qasam, pledged, that wallah, I will not fight against you. Abdullah bin Zubair says to him, well, if you do qasam and you're not able to fulfill it, you do kafara and then you're okay. And this is what Zubair does and guarantees his, outcome in Jahannam. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen went to there, talked about the Quran. Even after all this, finally he told somebody, he addressed his own people and he said, is anyone among you willing to take this Quran to this group and say that let us settle down our dispute on the basis of the Quran? And he says that you might be killed if you go there. But I guarantee you, if you are killed, you will go to Jannah. Nobody other than Ali could give that kind of a guarantee. One young man stood up, and Ali said, sit down, 3 times. And, when he stood up 3 times, Ali said, okay, come. Give him the Quran. He says, go. When he reached there halfway, he said, this is the Quran, and this is the call of Ali. Come and, resolve your dispute on the basis of the Quran. They started attacking him, shooting arrows first and then spears, and they actually killed him. The mother was there in the camp of Ali, and she started running, which is there. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, go and bring to his companions, go and bring his body. And this is where we see that, Ahlul Bayt have been with the Quran all the time. We do not say that we only follow the Ahlul Bayt. No, we follow the Ahlul Bayt and the Quran. And of course, we believe they are part of Ar-Rasikhuna fil Ilm. They are the main teachers of the teachings of the Quran. करबला में भी आप देखें, एक सिंबॉलिक उन्वान है. कहा जाता है, अभी हमारे सामने वो सोर्सेज और रेफरेंसेस नहीं हैं, लेकिन अक्सर सुनते हैं, and maybe it's just a symbolic way of putting it, कि जब आवाज़ इस्तिग़ासा दिया है हुसैन ने और अहले हरम के रोने की आवाज़ आती है, इमाम आए ख़ैमों के पास और पूछते हैं कि रोने की वजह क्या है, अभी तो हम जिंदा हैं, मेरी आवाज़ पहुंच रही होगी. उस वक्त बताया गया इमाम हुसैन से कि अली असगर जो है इतना रो रहा है कि तमाम कोशिश के बावजूद वो चुप नहीं हुआ बच्चा. माँ ने कोशिश की, बहन ने कोशिश की, फूफी ने कोशिश की, लेकिन उस वक्त इमाम हुसैन अलैहिस्सलाम ने कहा कि असगर को हमें दे दो, हम कोशिश करेंगे पानी का कोई इंतज़ाम हो सके. जनाब रबाब ने आके असगर को जब हवाले किया होगा, रिवायत नहीं है, लेकिन यकीनन पूरी उम्मीद के साथ हवाले किया होगा, इसलिए कि वो देख रही थी कि आज जो भी लड़ने जाता है वो शहीद हो जाता है, लेकिन ये तो शिशमा है, ये तो चल भी नहीं सकता है. तलवार हाथ में लेने की बात तो बहुत बात की है. पूरी उम्मीद के साथ अपने शिशमाहे को बाबा के हवाले करती हैं. इमाम हुसैन अलैहिस्सलाम उस तपिश की वजह से, धूप की वजह से اپنے ہاتھ میں اصغر کو لیے ہوئے تھے، لیکن ابا کا دامن جو ہے اس کے اوپر ڈال دیتے ہیں اس کو کور کرنے کے لیے، تاکہ یہ سورج کی تپش سے اس کو اذیت نہ ہو علی اصغر کو۔ تھوڑی دیر کے لیے یزیدی لشکر یہ سمجھا کہ حسین اپنی جان بچانے کے لیے قرآن کو لے کے آ رہے ہیں۔ جب ابا کے دامن کو ہٹایا ہے، وہ قرآن تو نہیں تھا، لیکن قرآن کا ایک چھوٹا سا سورہ تھا، سورہ کوثر کی یہ تعبیر تھی اس زمانے میں زندہ، جو حسین کے ہاتھوں میں تھی۔ عزاداران حسین کربلا میں 2 لوگ ہیں جن کو ذبیح کہا جاتا ہے۔ ذبیح سے مراد یہ ہے کہ یہ شہید تو سب ہوئے ہیں، حملے کے ذریعے، تلوار کے ذریعے، تیر کے ذریعے، لیکن ذبح کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ وہ بندہ جو زندہ تھا اور اس کے گلو کو کاٹا گیا ہے اور اس میں جو ہے وہ ذبح ہو گیا ہے۔ عزاداران حسین جو تلوار کے ذریعے شہید ہوئے ہیں ہمارے ائمہ، اس میں علی ہے اور حسین ہے، لیکن علی بھی ذبیح نہیں ہے، سر پر تلوار لگی تھی۔ یہ صرف حسین ابن علی ہیں کہ جن کے سر کو تن سے جدا کیا گیا تھا جب ابھی زندہ تھے وہ۔ دوسری مثال جو امام عصر کی زیارت ناحیہ میں ملتی ہے، جہاں علی اصغر کی زیارت میں کہتے ہیں المذبوح، کہ وہ بچہ جو ذبح کر دیا گیا، جو اپنے بابا کے دامن میں ذبح کیا گیا، کس طرح سے؟ عزاداران حسین جب حرملا نے تیر چلایا ہے تو وہ کان کے ایک نیچے سے ایک طرف سے چلا ہے اور دوسری طرف نکل گیا ہے۔ یہ لگ رہا تھا کہ کسی نے جو ہے جناب علی اصغر کے گلو کو جو ہے ذبح کر دیا گیا ہے۔ کربلا میں حسین بھی مذبوح ہیں اور علی اصغر بھی مذبوح ہے۔ خداوند اس کے بعد قبول فرما، ہمارے گناہوں کو بخش دے، ہماری توفیقات میں اضافہ فرما۔ خداوند عالم اسلام میں صلاح اور امن کی فضا پیدا کر، تکفیری افواج کی تمام صلاحیت کو نیست و نابود فرما، فلسطین کی زمین میں امن و امان کا سامان فراہم فرما، امام کے ظہور میں تاجیل فرما۔ ربنا تقبل منا انک انت السمیع العلیم۔ ایک بار سورہ فاتحہ پڑھ